Today is July 16th, 2024, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. If you follow announcements in the Academy community, you'll know that recently I've been working to publish an entire set of study plans for grades K through 12, and they go into the details for each grade level in each subject area. Just a very, very intense project. And for homeschooling parents, I'd like you to look at that work that I've done, look at what I laid out there in all of those spreadsheets across all of those different grade levels for all of those subject areas, and ask yourself, would you be able to do something like that? Would you be able to take some blank spreadsheets, some blank Google Docs, and turn them into a complete K-12 curriculum that fulfills all subject requirements for modern studies and also addresses classical Catholic studies? And the answer will likely be no. This, after all, is my full-time vocation, and I've been working in education, in curriculum development, in teaching, in school administration for 25 years now. The fact that homeschool parents undertake this work of homeschooling and can't do that kind of work is the reason why homeschool parents struggle to educate their children. And I'd like to talk a little bit to parents to help them understand how they should approach homeschooling so that they can actually succeed and not make mistakes that are common to homeschool families. I can, as I said, take a blank spreadsheet, blank sheet of paper, and simply write out or type out a complete K-12 curriculum. And I can do that because I've been doing this work, researching, studying, teaching, developing curricula for 25 years now. When parents decide to homeschool, they're usually motivated by some very simple concerns. They're concerned that their children learn their faith. They're concerned that their children be safe. They're concerned that their children be protected from deceitful influences in their lives. And they think to themselves that keeping the children home and managing their education at home, at the very least, gives them some peace of mind, knowing that their children are safe and that they're under the influence of their parents who love them and who want them to be raised in the faith. And so that knowledge gives homeschooling parents very great comfort. And I can say that for all of the academic arguments I might make, for philosophical arguments and so on, when my wife and I talk about homeschooling, what we always come back to is the very simple fact that we just want our kids to be safe. That's really why we choose to homeschool. Now, we're not the kind of parents who shield our kids from lots of stuff. My kids grow up and go into the military with no problem at age 18. They go to college, they succeed, go through college, secular universities and colleges. We're not the kind of parents that are afraid of the world. The issue, however, is that when our children are minors, they need to be protected for a number of reasons. First of all, they're not independent. The reason why legal adulthood begins at age 18 is because it's understood that kids under 18 can't handle freedom. They can't handle freedom responsibly. So parents are expected, legally obligated, to direct their children, to watch over their children, to protect their children, and so on. So parents who say, you know what, I'd like to protect my children, are not crazy people. They're normal. And when the schools lose our trust, when we're not confident that the teachers or school administrators or other parents have our children's best interests in mind, it's normal and reasonable to say, you know what, I don't think this school is a good place for my kids to be for hours and hours a day when I can't keep an eye on them. So homeschooling is not some sort of excessive sheltering. It's just reasonable parenting. And in the 21st century, it's very common. So any prejudice against homeschooling is really just ignorant. No one thinks like that anymore at the university level, in career destinations, and so on. It's just ignorant, opinionated people trying to press their feelings and their thoughts, often their lack of opportunity to give those benefits to their children, upon others in a judgmental way, which is really just nonsense. But homeschooling in modern society is, in many cases, especially in our case, for instance, necessary as good parenting. We're not overly concerned about our kids experiencing the world. We just believe that there's a certain time in their life when it's safe for them to engage with the world without the protection of responsible adults. And we don't trust that modern schools are staffed by such adults today, and therefore we keep our kids home. And yeah, there are some negative consequences of that, but we accept those negative consequences as the lesser of the evils that are faced in this generation. So we keep our kids home primarily because we're concerned with their safety before they enter adulthood. After we've made those decisions, then we start to talk about what we're going to do as homeschooling parents and how we can best prepare them for success as adults. Now, for my wife and I, who have worked together in education for 25 years, these issues are pretty comfortable for us. We can get into details of curriculum and teaching and pedagogy and school records and all this kind of stuff because it's our full-time career. It's our vocation. And we've been working in education since before our kids were even born. So we're very comfortable dealing with all of the legal issues, all of the curriculum issues, college admission issues. All of these things for us are very comfortable. It's our profession. But for most homeschooling parents, while they have the right motives in keeping their kids home, they don't have that professional skill and experience to understand how to manage the education of their children, especially when they have multiple children. And so I'd like to talk about this a little bit and offer some help. The main problem that parents face is that they have young children and they don't have clearly defined goals for their children's education. They may have some goals, but they're not measurable goals. They're not real goals. They're not actionable goals, as we would say. They're just sort of vague, maybe moral ideals, but they're not really educational goals. And because they don't have clear goals, they can't establish clear objectives. And because they can't establish clear objectives, they can't identify necessary tasks. So they spend a lot of their time just sort of wandering around, reacting to things, trying to make the best decision day by day. And they end up wasting a lot of money. They end up doing things by trial and error, and trial and error is the most expensive way to learn things. You know, the Bible teaches us that we should always seek out counselors before we do things. In a multitude of counselors, there is wisdom, the Proverbs say. And most parents don't do this, especially converts to the faith who don't have friends, who don't have mentors, who don't know people they can contact. And when you mix that with pride that causes them to be afraid to ask questions and appear ignorant, they end up staying to themselves and doing things by trial and error. Unfortunately, the trial and error is done at the expense of the children's education, which is why they shouldn't do that. And no matter how hard we try, parents don't ask for help. We watch people day by day sign up for our programs, make all kinds of bad decisions. They're in 1,000 different things before they have ever even asked us for any advice, just doing their own will, using our program in ways that it's not even intended to be used, just doing their own will. And we already know what the outcomes are going to be, but we watch family after family after family just come in, make all kinds of crazy decisions, spend all kinds of money, and then fail. And no matter how much we try to reach out to them or communicate with them, they stay to themselves, and there's nothing we can do about it. So again, I'd like to try to help some parents who might at least listen to a talk. Now, the problem, as I said, is that parents who don't have experience in education don't understand what the goals of education should be. They talk about things that are not appropriate for educational goals, like saying you're going to raise saints. You're not going to raise saints because saints are not raised. Saints are produced by a collaboration between God's grace given to a child and that child's free will. So raising saints is not the work of education. And parents who say that speak ignorantly. And worst of all, parents who act on that are just setting themselves up for all kinds of problems. God alone can raise saints. God alone can give grace. The Gospel of John says that for those who believe in Christ, he gave them power to become children of God. That's something that God alone can do. And so raising saints is not an appropriate goal for education. The appropriate goals are more specific things, like and things that are also in our control. So you can't say, my goal is for my son to know this or that, because you cannot transfer knowledge into your son's soul as if he's a USB drive and you're just going to download information into him. It doesn't work like that. The will stands as a barrier to anything entering into the soul of another individual. And so you're really, and I use this illustration frequently, this is what the illustration used to be used for, you're like a man leading a horse to water. Your job is to prepare the water, make sure the water is clean and fresh, and then show the horse where the water is. But then the horse has to choose to drink. And at that point, there's nothing else you can do. You've done your job. You've prepared the water and led the horse to the water. You've done your job. That's how education works. We've got to prepare the water, and we've got to lead the horse to the water. And when we've done that, we've fulfilled our responsibilities. And so our goals should relate to that sort of work. So the goals for the farmer would be something not like, I'm going to get the horse to drink. That would not be a good goal. To say, I'm going to satisfy my horse's thirst would not be a good goal. To say, I'm going to prepare a tank of clean, fresh water is a reasonable goal. That's an actionable goal. To say that I'm going to lead my horse to the water tank is a reasonable goal. But to say that I'm going to satisfy my horse's thirst is not a reasonable goal. So we've got to ask ourselves if we have the right kinds of goals when we think about education. And for experienced educators, these things are pretty simple. We know what the goals of education are. We know what we're supposed to aim at, and we know what we're not supposed to aim at. People who are not experienced in education don't understand that. And their talk sounds impressive. They sound very impressive when they talk about what they're going to do. But experienced educators know that the goals that they talk about are inappropriate and that they're speaking out of ignorance. So having the right goals is step one. And the goals should be things that are in your control as the parent. So for example, saying something like, I'm going to provide my child with access to Latin studies. I'm going to provide my child with access to tutorial support for mathematics. I'm going to arrange for my child to study world history in a certain way. Those are actionable goals. Those are things that are in your control. You can do them and you can check them off and be finished. But that's the extent of your power as a parent, as a teacher, and beyond that, your child is the one who's going to have to work and make good decisions. And you're going to see that really that's not in your control. So setting good goals, that's step number one. Most parents don't do that. They set foolish goals, unrealistic goals, inappropriate goals. And then they do all kinds of craziness, fall into all kinds of scams and gimmicks because they're easily taken advantage of. Because usually they get emotional and they get desperate and they just start spending money all over the place until they finally crash and burn and then end up making decisions in the end that are worse than anything that could ever have happened had they set appropriate goals. And that's a common trend in high school, to set ridiculous goals, grow desperate in the pursuit of those ridiculous goals, and then just crash, burn, and quit everything. So the first step is setting realistic goals, something that professional educators understand how to do, but homeschooling parents often don't understand how to do. So getting those things right is an important step one. As I mentioned before, when we have good goals established, we can then work on the second step of planning, which is identifying objectives. The goals are the end results that we aim for. Objectives are intermediate steps between where we are now and where we need to be to fulfill those goals. Steps that are reasonable for us to pursue, that are incremental, and can be pursued usually over a long period of time. We can't establish objectives until we establish the goal. And if our goal is improper, then our objectives will also be unrealistic. So we've got to establish good goals, and then we've got to establish objectives or intermediate steps from where we are to the fulfillment of that goal. And this is grinding work. And most homeschooling parents are not prepared for this work. They don't understand how to do this work. They underestimate the difficulty of this work, and they don't do it. If you know much about business, you'll know that one important part of business is project management. And project management is nothing more than this process of establishing goals, identifying objectives, setting dates for milestones, and then working on individual tasks that satisfy the objectives that satisfy the goals. And companies spend a great deal of time and energy on project management work, laying out goals, laying out objectives, setting milestones, and then focusing on tasks as they go along. And the reason why is because in order to complete complex goals, this work has to be done so that everyone knows what needs to be done now. What's the priority today? We have to know that, or I should say, we have to know what needs to be done today. And we have to know that while we're doing it, we're moving closer towards our goal. And the only way that we can do that is if we've done the work of project management. And it's very difficult work. It's time-consuming, mentally tiresome work to lay out and plan projects, but it's necessary. When we come to homeschooling, we've got an even bigger and more complex project, one that spans 12, 15, 18 years, that covers multiple subjects, possibly multiple children. And if we look and ask parents if they've laid out their goals and objectives and tasks as a form of project management, we often find that they've done no such thing. And so the family wakes up in the morning and no one knows what's supposed to be done today. No one knows if they're making progress. No one knows if they're getting closer to the goal. No one knows if they're on track. No one knows if they're going to be able to fulfill the goals that they've set, because they haven't set goals, or they haven't established objectives, or they don't know what the tasks are. And this is how many families, I would even say most families, conduct their homeschooling. And it's why they're unsuccessful. Now, what many families will do is they'll look for a homeschooling solution, and they'll find all of these boxed curriculum programs that tell them that they've done all this work for them. They'll say, oh yeah, we've got a curriculum all laid out, and we provide lesson plans and this and that, and they gobble it up and start spending money, buying all of these boxes of books and lesson plans. But notice they're spending money on resources which are means to ends, and they still haven't determined the ends. They still haven't identified the goals. They still haven't identified the objectives, and therefore they have no objective or reasonable means of judging whether a certain program can actually lead them successfully to the end or not. Now, when they don't know what to do, what do they tend to do? They look around at what other people are doing, and they simply copy what the other people are doing. They find out that there's a local homeschool group, and they go there and they find that all the ladies are using XYZ curriculum, and they sign up for XYZ curriculum. But if you would start poking around and asking questions, you would find that the ladies in the group are just as ignorant of these planning issues as they are. But what you get are these crazy parents who want to be leaders of groups, who just act with confidence and pretend that they know what they're doing. And that's what a con man is, by the way. A con man, the word con in con man stands for confidence. They're fast talkers. They act like they know what they're doing. They come across with this air of confidence that makes people trust them, and that's how they manipulate people. These homeschool group leaders are often just con women that act like they know what they're doing, and other parents, especially younger parents with younger children, see them and just assume that they actually know what they're doing, and so they do what they do. They buy their curriculum books, they imitate them, do what they do, join their homeschool groups, and so on. But if you were to start asking some questions about the goals, and then see whether the goals that are stated are reasonable goals or whether it's a bunch of nonsense, many of these groups would be exposed. And I'm afraid that that's another one of the problems with homeschooling, is just the appearance of know-how from groups that really aren't accomplishing very much. So the only way that parents can get around this is to stop trying to dodge this work of setting goals, identifying objectives, and then laying out the projects. Many homeschool programs claim to do this, but they don't do it. The goals are never clearly stated. The objectives are never clearly identified. There's no means of tracking progress towards real educational goals. And you just end up doing busy work. You end up filling out workbooks and checking boxes. And if you're asked, where do these check boxes lead? To what objective do these tasks lead us? No one can answer. If you say, towards what goals are we working in this program? You'll get nonsense answers. No one will give you an actionable, measurable goal. And that's how they get away with it. There's no way to hold them accountable because there's no measurable goal. Now, what happens is when you come to the end of these programs, let's take Seton Homeschool, for example. You'll come to the end of this program, and when we consider the quality of the program, whether it's effective, what you'll find the schools doing is simply comparing their results to public school statistics. They'll say, well, the average public school SAT score is 1050, and our students, the average score is 1130. See how great that is? Well, no, that's not great at all, because those kids were dropped off at school every day by parents who had nothing to do with their education in free public schools. Meanwhile, we've sacrificed our whole family life, spent thousands and thousands of dollars and countless hours working on education rather than anything else. And the difference is 80 points on the SAT, 100 points on the SAT. That's the difference. And so by comparing to public school averages, the homeschools justify their activity and claim to be successful. But when you consider the costs that were required to obtain those results, it's not successful at all. And these programs should be held accountable to these costs, but they're not. But parents will just look around, find a homeschool program that looks pretty, that has nice pictures. We literally have had parents ask us if we have colored pictures for students. And when we said no, why would you ask about colored pictures? That was the end of the discussion. So there are parents who are literally judging books by their covers, as insane as that might be, looking at the actual books and the materials from the homeschool programs with no thought of goals or objectives or whether or not those goals and objectives will be satisfied, but looking at other things like whether you have online lessons or they're printed in books, whether you've got color pictures or whether you've got videos, whether you've got this or whether you've got that, whether you use this style of cursive handwriting or whether you use this style of writing. Just absolutely irrelevant issues, while the real questions of education are left unanswered. And this is why homeschooling parents struggle to succeed in homeschooling. And we can just go on and on talking about why homeschooling rarely ever works for anyone. Now, in order to fix this, like I said, the only solution is to take the time, put in the mental energy, seek counsel, and identify proper goals for your children's education, proper goals for your work as a homeschooling parent. Once you identify those goals, you can then set objectives. And this is one of the ways you can tell if you have good goals. You can set objectives. You can say, okay, for us to fulfill this goal, we need to do 4 things. First, we need to do this. Then from that point, we need to do this. Then from that point, we need to do this, and then we'll achieve our goal. Those are objectives. And then once those objectives are set, you can look at them and say, okay, now that I see these objectives are laid out and they will lead us to our goal, I can just focus on the first objective. I can focus all of my attention and energy on the first objective, and I can now make a set of steps, tasks, that lead me from where I am to the fulfillment of that first objective. And I don't have to think about any other objectives. I don't have to think about the goal anymore because I've already mapped it out. I just have to focus on that first objective and lay out the tasks that need to be completed to fulfill that objective. And once I do that, I have the advantage of being able to focus just on the immediate task in front of me. And you can see how this corresponds to Christ's teaching about the Christian life when he said, take no thought for tomorrow. That attitude of just being present and focused on present duties, present responsibilities, priorities of the moment. We can't do that unless the goals and objectives and tasks have already been laid out. Otherwise, we're just running in circles. Jesus could talk about doing that because God has already revealed his law, and so we already know that we have a plan that leads us to the tasks, to the objectives, to the goals, and so on. With respect to God's commands, we can live focused on what's in front of us because God has already revealed to us his commandments. But when we get into our own matters, like the work of education or business, we're the ones who are responsible for that work, humanly speaking. We're responsible to set the goals and the objectives and identify the tasks. And then the way that we pursue those goals with patience and perseverance is by simply focusing on one task at a time, focusing on the task in front of us, and just being patient, keeping our eyes down on the ground in front of us and knowing that we're on a path that, if we persevere in it, will lead us to our goal. And that's the work that homeschooling parents tend not to do. That's the work that school teachers commonly do. For example, if you think about a college professor you've had or a teacher, you know that on the first day of school, they can give you a syllabus. And if you think about the syllabus, what it is it's a set of objectives based on their goals for the course. So let's say that we're in a college course. We've got a 16-week semester, and our class meets twice a week. So let's say 30 classes. You'll see that the professor has a goal for the course, usually related to the title of the course. And the professor has done the work of laying out the 30 or so lessons that need to be studied that will lead us from where we are to the fulfillment of our goal for the course. And so on the syllabus, you'll have a list of what are essentially the 30 or so objectives for the course. It's the plan for the course. And the professor, having established that syllabus, is going to focus on one class at a time and make sure that the objective of that class is fulfilled. And beyond that, he'll go down to making, let's say, a lecture or a class plan or a lesson plan for what specific tasks he needs to do to accomplish the purpose of that class, which is one of the objectives of the overall course. Now, the professor has already done that, and it's likely that he's worked that course out over a number of years and taught it a number of times. He already knows exactly what needs to be done, in what order, and how. A new teacher will struggle his first or second year because he's never done that. And so in the first year, teachers are working to draft their syllabi. They understand that there's a goal for the course, but they really don't know how to achieve that goal yet. They've never done it before. And so what they do is they draft a syllabus, they lay out the schedule of classes and topics that they'd like to cover, thinking about how those topics in that order will lead them from where they are to where they want to end up. And as I said, for a new teacher, the lessons and the tasks and the activities, they're all experimental as the teacher works to figure out how to lead students to the end goal of the course. And it takes some time and experience. But once the teachers have figured that out, at least good teachers, once they've figured that out, they now have a sure and clear and practical plan for exactly what needs to be done at every part of every class, from the very first class until the end of the semester. And that's represented in summary form in the syllabus. Now again, when we come to homeschooling parents, how many homeschooling parents can do any such thing? How many parents do any such thing? Few or none. Now, they can purchase boxed curricula, but having a boxed curriculum and actually creating your own syllabus are two very different things. The syllabus established by an experienced teacher is something very different from some printed lesson plan book that comes from a homeschool publisher. They're two very different things. And the problem for homeschool parents is often that they don't get the chance to teach the same course over and over and over, year after year, as a school teacher does. Homeschooling, as I always say, is very difficult. And so parents need to understand what to look for and what to demand of a homeschool program. The program can't just send them a box of books with so-called lesson plans for them to follow every day. Now, the homeschool publishers can put those book lists together and they can put those lesson plans together. But those homeschool publishers are not taking responsibility for the actual success of that course of study in the homeschool. They're not taking into consideration the fact that different parents have a different number of children with different abilities and have to cover many different subjects. They're just working as a business, publishing their own materials for their own materials to sell to their customers. It's not a curriculum. It's not a detailed study plan. And so even if you buy the boxed curriculum and get all the lesson plans and all of the gadgets and gizmos and resources and all this, you still are likely not going to succeed in homeschooling, because remember, you still haven't established the goals. You're just comparing products and buying products, and then you're judging everything relative to everything else rather than judging everything in light of the established goals. And as long as you go on as a homeschooling parent without establishing the goals, you're just dodging the real work of education. Now, in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, this is what we deal with directly. We spend a great deal of time talking about the proper goals for education. You think of the book that I wrote, Understanding Classical Catholic Education. That entire book is intended to explain to parents what the history and principles of real classical Catholic education are, so that they can understand clearly what they're seeking to accomplish through homeschooling with a classical Catholic education. So that whole book is intended to help parents think in terms of goals. Then when you come to the Academy, you find that we've got tons of resources, articles and videos, talks on these very issues, talking about the proper goals for education. And one specific video and set of resources that I'd like to recommend is the work that I did on talking about the duties of Catholic parents. I'll put a link in the description for this talk, but if you search the Academy website for the duties of Catholic parents, there are 27 duties listed in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Those are the appropriate goals for our work as homeschooling parents, which is why I spent so much time talking about them. Those are appropriate goals, and you'll see how they align with what I explain and how they disagree with what many schools and homeschool publishers say are the goals of education. But you see us always working to help parents understand the goals of education so that they can know what we're trying to accomplish. We then also work to identify the objectives. And when you compare one program to another, if you compare the Classical Liberal Arts Academy to Seton or to Mother of Divine Grace or any other program, you'll see that our programs differ because the actual courses and resources used and the layout of the curriculum is really the plan of objectives to move from where we are to the fulfillment of those goals. Other homeschool programs don't share our goals. They have different goals that I would argue are faulty. That leads to a different set of objectives. And I would say that inasmuch as those objectives are not aligned with the true goal in education, those objectives are faulty. And then it moves from the objectives to the tasks, and you end up with lots of unproductive, wandering, busy work that really isn't moving the students upward and forward in intellectual formation. They're just keeping them busy and selling resources for their own benefit. In the Academy, you'll see how much work we do to explain the purpose of every task, to make every task as efficient as possible, and to simply avoid anything that doesn't directly contribute to our pursuit of the stated goals. So when you look at different programs and compare different programs, you can't just compare this book to that book or this course to that course, you've got to start with goals and ask which program shares my goals for the education of my children. Once you identify that program, then you need to look and ask, what objectives has this program laid out to lead us to fulfill those goals? And you'll find that some programs can explain what the objectives are. And so even though they might say the right things when talking about goals, they're not going to lead students to the fulfillment of those goals because they don't have a real plan for doing so. This is true in many Catholic schools, especially traditional Catholic schools, where they say all sorts of good things about the goals of education and this, but the teachers and administrators really don't have experience or know what the objectives should be to pursue those goals. And then lastly, it should be brought all the way down to the level of tasks so that parents really can understand what specific tasks to focus on, how they'll satisfy the objectives, and how those objectives will lead them to the fulfillment of the goals for their studies. Now, again, in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, all of this is available. We explain the goals, we explain the objectives, we show that what we're doing is what was done historically, or what we're doing in other courses is what's necessary according to legal requirements and so on. But we present that entire project management plan to our families so that families can focus on immediate tasks and be confident that they're headed towards the goals. Now, when parents don't do this, and the reason why they normally don't do this is because it's very difficult. It takes great discipline. One of the things that is most important about a teacher, especially a good school teacher, and when I say teacher, I'm not suggesting that all school teachers are good. Most of them are actually ineffective. But there are some teachers who are effective school teachers, and what you'll always notice about the character of effective teachers is that they have great routine. They're simple people, and they carry out routines. They have standard operating procedures. They do things the same way all the time. They're very disciplined and systematic, and they follow routines. And then when we turn to homeschool families, we often find that they're chaotic, have no discipline, have no routine. There's just no chance of success in the pursuit of real educational goals. So these are the real issues. We've got to be disciplined, we've got to develop routine, and that routine has to be goal-oriented. And all of this work that I'm describing is difficult work, very difficult to establish. But if we as homeschool parents do this work and establish this routine and order and discipline, establish this project management plan, we can succeed in real education. We can succeed, but it takes a lot of preparatory work. Now, we've done most of that work for Catholic families, but there's still work for Catholic parents to do to understand it so that they can make principled decisions in issues that arise in their families, in their own lives, and so on. There's got to be a collaboration of the parents with the academy and with the children. So there's a lot of work to do, but we try to make that work as efficient as possible. But neglecting that work, dodging that work, refusing to take up that work, that's what causes homeschools to fail. Now, you may say, well, it seems to me that homeschools that I know are doing well. And I would argue that that is likely an appearance. And if you were to poke around and really ask, what exactly are they doing? What goals are they actually fulfilling? If you end up saying, well, their kids go to college and they get SAT scores that are higher than the average public school scores, you're comparing apples with oranges. That's not a reasonable comparison. None of those parents undertook the work of homeschooling so that they could beat public school SAT scores by a few points. No one set out to homeschool to accomplish such a goal. What were the goals they originally set out for? That's what should judge whether their homeschool plan has been effective or not. And if they haven't achieved it, well, then it's not successful. And pointing to points where they've beaten the public schools who accept any kid off the street is not acceptable. That can't be presented as proof that a homeschool program is effective. They've got to point to the true goals of homeschooling and show that they've fulfilled them. And if they can't fulfill them, it's really not an option for homeschooling. So I challenge you to poke around and ask questions about goals and objectives and see what kind of responses you get, whether they're reasonable or whether it's just con man talk, because I think you'll be surprised. So if you want to succeed in homeschooling, the virtue that's most important is perseverance. You've got to move one step at a time for a long time to achieve the true goals of education through homeschooling. You've got to know what those goals are. You've got to understand what objectives are necessary to reach those goals. And then you've got to know what tasks are necessary to reach the objective in front of you. And then you've got to focus on the task in front of you and keep life simple, moving one task at a time, patiently, over a long period of time. That method of working, little by little, bit by bit, over a long period of time, that's how this work gets done. Refusing to do that work is why homeschool families fail. Learning how to do that work, understanding how that work is to be done, and then actually carrying it out over time is what allows homeschooling parents to succeed. Now, in the Academy, recently, I've published an entire set of study plans. So you've got the Understanding Classical Catholic Education book, which explains the principles and history of real classical education, which should help you to understand the true goals of education. And then you've got those study plans, which deals with the objectives and the specific tasks. So we provide everything you need to succeed in real education. You've got to be willing to take up that work and carry it out with that simple, routine patience, which is the only means by which true education gets done. If you have questions about those things, please get in touch. Remember what I said before, that a wise person seeks counsel. Ask if you have questions, get help if you're not sure of something, and give experienced teachers an opportunity to share their experience, their expertise with you, so that you can benefit from it. That doesn't mean you have to do exactly what they say or you have to follow them like robots, but you should at least listen to the voice of experienced teachers and curriculum developers and school administrators and homeschool parents. At least listen to what they have to say and take their advice into consideration. So that's my advice for how to succeed in homeschooling. It's difficult work. It's heroic work. But if you're concerned with your child's safety and happiness, and more importantly, your fulfillment of your responsibilities as a parent, there's no other option. And so I encourage you to take up the work, trust that with God's grace you can do it. Not only do it, but persevere in doing it to the end. And when you need help, ask, because help is available. But you need to initiate that process. So I hope that's helpful. God bless.